If I'm not mistaken, you were the second out, right?
I made the second out. I hit a fly ball to left center. I didn't hit it well.
What'd you think as you went back to the dugout?
Oh, I think we're done. It's the greatest comeback. And what did we score? 3 runs to win?
Right. And so
3 runs with 2 outs, nobody on, facing elimination. It's the greatest single, I think, with your back to the wall comeback in World Series history.
So when you got back to the dugout, it was just dead quiet? Is that what it was?
I did. I went back up to the locker room because I didn't want to see the Boston in our field.
Mm-hmm.
So I go up.
I am Mason, and this is Baseball Icons. At 72, Keith Hernandez still sits in the SNY broadcast booth calling Mets games, but the biggest addict label from his past is the one allegation he can never fully escape. You clicked because he finally confirmed it, and the truth is he did confirm it decades ago in a federal courtroom under oath. The real confirmation in 2026 is not about the cocaine. It is about survival. In April 2026, Hernandez went under the knife for 4 hours to repair a bulging disc that had shut down his right quadricep. His body was betraying him. On May 4th, he returned to the booth, proving once again that Keith Hernandez does not quit, even when everything around him says he should. But before we get to that moment of resilience, we need to understand how a man who admitted to massive cocaine use, who played games high, who told a national audience that women do not belong in the dugout, and who befriended some of the most polarizing political figures in American history, managed to become the most beloved voice in New York sports media. Quick thing, if you want to back this story, hit the hype feature and give this video some hype. It really helps. The journey to 72 was not supposed to be smooth, and it was not. Hernandez reached a new 3-year deal with SNY in early 2026 that will keep him calling games through at least 2028. But the terms reveal the toll. He will call only 90 to 91 games per season, down from 110. He calls it the Ralph Kiner blueprint, a gradual scaling back to prepare the next generation. The 86-mile commute from Sag Harbor to Citi Field has become what he describes as rugged. His body is reminding him that age is undefeated, even for someone who once redefined what it meant to play first base. SNY is already preparing for the post-Keith era by giving Daniel Murphy more reps, but for now, the Gary Keith Ron booth remains intact. This is the current confirmation, the one that says he is mortal, that the image of the sharp-tongued analyst with the iconic mustache is fading into something slower and more careful. But to understand why this matters, you have to go back to where it all started, back to the Bay Area in 1953. Keith Hernandez was born on October 20th, 1953, in the athletic culture of the San Francisco Bay Area. He grew up in Pacifica and Millbrae, attending Terra Nova and Cappuccino high schools. Even as a teenager, Hernandez showed signs of the stubborn independence that would define his career. He sat out his entire senior high school season because of a dispute with a coach. Most players would have swallowed their pride and played. Hernandez refused. It was an early signal that he would not bend to authority, even if it cost him. Despite missing his senior year, the St. Louis Cardinals saw something in him and selected him in the 42nd round of the 1971 draft as the 783rd overall pick. That position almost never produces a major leaguer, let alone an MVP. But Hernandez was different. He climbed through the Cardinal system on the strength of his defensive intelligence and his high contact hitting. By 1974, he made his debut at Candlestick Park against the Giants, going 1 for 2 with 2 walks and an RBI. The Cardinals believed in him so much that they traded Joe Torre to the Mets just to clear the path for their young first baseman. It is ironic, given where Hernandez would eventually end up. During those early years, teammates called him Mex, a nickname based on his surname and California roots. Though he later clarified his Spanish and Scots-Irish heritage, the nickname stuck anyway because Hernandez had a presence that demanded labels. By 1979, Hernandez had won the National League MVP award, sharing it with Willie Stargell. He would go on to win 11 consecutive Gold Gloves from 1978 to 1988, a defensive streak that revolutionized the first base position. Hernandez played abnormally far off the bag, charged bunts with a level of aggression that neutralized small ball tactics, and anticipated plays before they happened. He was a defensive artist, and the respect he earned made what came next hit even harder. The defensive revolution he created was real. First basemen before Hernandez were essentially statues, anchored to the bag, waiting for throws. Hernandez turned the position into something dynamic, something aggressive. He made plays that should not have been possible, but all of that excellence created a contrast that made his fall from grace even more shocking. In 1982, Hernandez won a World Series with the Cardinals. He was on top of the baseball world, celebrated for his leadership and his excellence. But even as he was lifting the trophy, a darker reality was taking hold in the clubhouse. Cocaine had entered the game, and Hernandez had entered a relationship with the drug that he later described as demonic. The public did not know it yet, but the chaos was building, and it would explode in a federal courtroom courtroom in Pittsburgh 3 years later. The 1985 Pittsburgh drug trials are the core of every allegation ever leveled against Keith Hernandez. This was not rumor. This was not speculation. This was sworn testimony under a grant of immunity. Hernandez sat in that courtroom and admitted to using massive amounts of cocaine during the 1980 season. He admitted to snorting cocaine before games. He admitted to playing under the influence of a cocaine high. He called the drug an insatiable desire for more, and he told the court that it had robbed him of his professional focus to the point where he could barely remember portions of the 1980 season. This was the confirmation. This was the moment the biggest addict label became permanent. The Pittsburgh trials were a federal investigation into the distribution of cocaine within Major League Baseball, and they shattered the illusion that the game was clean. Multiple players testified, and their admissions painted a picture of a league where drug dealers had nearly unrestricted access to clubhouses. The Pirate Parrot mascot was eventually implicated in introducing players to dealers. It was a scandal that reached every corner of the sport. The trials exposed a network where dealers moved freely through clubhouses, where transactions happened in bathroom stalls during games, where the substance had become so normalized that players kept it in their uniform pockets. This was not a few isolated incidents. This was systemic. This was a culture that had rotted from the inside. Hernandez was not the only player to testify, but his testimony was among the most detailed and damning. Let me walk you through the other players who confirmed their own use, starting from the bottom up. Number 5, Dale Berra testified that he purchased cocaine from a dealer named Curtis Strong. His testimony highlighted the systemic nature of clubhouse distribution. It was not isolated incidents. It was a network. Strong had access. He had customers. He had a business running inside Major League Baseball clubhouses. Number 4, Lonnie Smith admitted to procuring cocaine wrapped in what he called girly magazines. His story was important because it became the catalyst for Hernandez quitting. Hernandez watched Smith have such a debilitating experience with the drug that he could not participate in a game. That moment of watching his teammate fall apart was what finally pushed Hernandez to stop. But the fact that it took watching someone else collapse before Hernandez stopped says something about how deep he was in. Number 3, John Milner testified that he purchased cocaine in bathroom stalls during games. He also implicated Hall of Famers in amphetamine use, expanding the scope of the scandal beyond just cocaine. The trials were not just about one drug. They were about a culture where performance enhancement and recreational use blurred together. Number 2, Tim Raines admitted to keeping a gram of cocaine in his uniform pocket during games. He said he slid head first to avoid breaking the vial. Think about that. A player was more worried about breaking his cocaine vial than injuring himself on a slide. That is how deep the addiction ran. Raines was a star. He was fast. He was talented, and he was carrying cocaine onto the field every single night. Number 1, Keith Hernandez. He admitted to massive use in 1980. He admitted to pre-game snorting. He referred to cocaine as the devil on this earth. He estimated that roughly 40% of all Major League players were using the drug at the time, though he later admitted that figure might have been an overstatement born from his own skewed perspective. Hernandez was the biggest name, and his testimony carried the most weight. When an MVP, a World Series champion, a Gold Glove winner admits to playing high, it changes the entire narrative of the sport. The mechanism of Hernandez's recovery was as dramatic as his fall. He testified that he made the decision to stop using cocaine in mid-1983 after witnessing Lonnie Smith's breakdown. Hernandez described a moment of clarity where he flushed a gram of cocaine down a toilet after suffering from the shakes and a persistent nosebleed. It was a physical breaking point, and it forced him to confront what the drug was doing to him. The shakes were not just withdrawal. They were his body screaming at him to stop. The nosebleed was not just a side effect. It was a warning that he was destroying himself from the inside out, and the fact that he had to flush the cocaine down the toilet, that he could not just throw it away, suggests he did not trust himself to resist if it was still accessible. That is addiction. That is the insatiable desire he described. The fallout from the trials was severe. Commissioner Peter Ueberroth issued a 1-year suspension to Hernandez in 1986, though it was commuted on the condition that he donate 10% of his salary to drug rehabilitation programs and perform 100 hours of community service. Hernandez paid the price, but the public never forgot. 10% of his salary was not a small amount. 100 hours of community service forced him to face the consequences of his actions in a public way. But compared to what could have happened, compared to the careers that were ended by cocaine, Hernandez got off light. The cultural impact of the Pittsburgh trials cannot be overstated. It exposed a league where the wholesome image was a lie. For Hernandez, the trial was the final confirmation of a secret that had threatened to destroy his career. But instead of ending him, it became the starting point for a rejuvenation that led him to the New York Mets and a second World Series title. title. The question that never gets answered is whether Hernandez would have changed if he had not been forced to testify. Would he have quit on his own? Would he have kept using? The testimony made recovery mandatory, not optional. In June 1983, the Cardinals traded Hernandez to the Mets. Hernandez initially viewed the trade with dread, fearing he was being exiled to a perennially losing franchise. But his arrival at Shea Stadium coincided with a surge of young talent and a management shift aimed at turning the Mets into a dominant force. Hernandez was appointed the team's first official captain, a role that allowed him to instill defensive discipline and professional accountability in a clubhouse known for its boisterous and excessive behavior. The irony is thick. A man who had just admitted to playing high on cocaine was now holding others accountable for their professionalism. A man who had flushed cocaine down a toilet because he could not trust himself was now the moral authority in the Mets clubhouse. That takes a certain level of audacity, or delusion, or both. The 1986 Mets were legendary for their partying, their drinking, their chaos. And Hernandez was the captain. He was supposed to be the stabilizing force, and in many ways he was. On the field, he was a leader. He held players accountable for defensive mistakes. He demanded fundamentals. But off the field, the 1986 Mets were just as wild as Hernandez had been in his cocaine days. The difference is Hernandez had gotten sober, the rest of the team had not. The 1986 Mets season remains the definitive chapter of Hernandez's athletic legacy. He slashed .310, .417, .429 during the regular season, serving as the offensive and defensive anchor of a team that won 108 games. His leadership during the 1986 World Series, particularly during the dramatic Game 6, solidified his status as a New York icon. But even as he was being celebrated on the field, the public was beginning to see the multifaceted nature of his character. He was as passionate about Civil War history and literature as he was about baseball fundamentals. He was complex, and that complexity would serve him well in his second career. The 1986 championship was supposed to be redemption. It was supposed to wash away the cocaine scandal, and for a while it did. But redemption is never permanent, and the past always finds a way back. The transition from local sports hero to national cultural icon came in 1992 when Hernandez appeared on Seinfeld. The episode titled The Boyfriend featured Hernandez playing a heightened version of himself. Jerry Seinfeld developed a male crush on him. Elaine Bennies tried to date him. The episode's central parody of the magic bullet theory from the film JFK, reimagined as the magic loogie spat by a second spitter revealed to be Roger McDowell, became a landmark moment in television history. The pretty boy persona established in Seinfeld provided Hernandez with a secondary career path that very few athletes successfully navigate. It allowed him to maintain relevance long after his playing days ended, transforming him into a figure that younger generations recognized not for his gold gloves but for his comedic timing and his iconic mustache. The cultural impact of that Seinfeld episode is difficult to overstate. It introduced Hernandez to an audience that did not watch baseball. It made him a pop culture figure, not just a sports figure, and it gave him financial security in the form of residuals. As of 2026, Hernandez still collects roughly $3,000 to $5,000 annually in residuals from that episode. That might not sound like much, but it is money for doing nothing decades after the episode aired. The episode also became the title of his memoir, I'm Keith Hernandez, a phrase that he uses in the show as a moment of self-affirmation. The Seinfeld appearance also led to other opportunities, including a long-running commercial partnership with Just for Men alongside Walt Frazier. His mustache was even rated as the #1 sports mustache in history. That mustache became a brand, and Hernandez knew how to market it. The cultural capital from Seinfeld became the bedrock for his transition into the broadcast booth. Without Seinfeld, Hernandez is just another former player trying to stay relevant. With Seinfeld, he is an icon, and icons get opportunities that former players do not. In 2006, Hernandez joined the inaugural broadcast team for Sportsnet New York, forming a partnership with Gary Cohen and Ron Darling that would become widely regarded as the best booth in baseball. Hernandez brought a raw, unfiltered sensibility to the telecasts, often criticizing the poor fundamentals of modern players with a level of bluntness that was rare in regional broadcasting. He did not hold back. If a player missed a cutoff man, Hernandez called it out. If a player failed to execute a bunt, Hernandez explained exactly what went wrong and why it mattered. This honesty made him beloved by fans who were tired of sanitized corporate broadcasts. But this unfiltered style led to a significant controversy early in his tenure, one that revealed the uglier side of his personality. During a 2006 game between the Mets and the San Diego Padres, Hernandez noticed massage therapist Kelly Calabrese in the Padres' dugout high-fiving players. His reaction was swift and inflammatory. I will not say that women belong in the kitchen, but they do not belong in the dugout. The comment was immediately condemned as sexist by both the Padres and Mets management, as well as the broader public. San Diego manager Bruce Bochy expressed disappointment, stating that gender should not even be an issue in the modern game. Hernandez was reprimanded by SNY and issued an on-air apology, though he initially attempted to dismiss the remark as only teasing. This was not teasing. This was a reflection of an older, more exclusionary era of the sport, and it stuck to Hernandez like a stain. The comment revealed a worldview where women had a specific place, and that place was not in professional sports spaces. It was not a slip of the tongue. It was a belief stated out loud, on air, for thousands of people to hear. And the fact that he tried to brush it off as teasing made it worse. It suggested he did not understand why people were upset. It suggested he thought the criticism was overblown. Despite the backlash, his position at SNY remained secure, largely because of the undeniable chemistry he shared with Cohen and Darling, and his deep-seated knowledge of the game's intricacies. But the incident highlighted the dual nature of his broadcasting persona. His honesty made him beloved, but his comments occasionally revealed biases that were hard to ignore. The network could have fired him. They chose not to. That decision says as much about the value they placed on ratings and chemistry as it does about their commitment to addressing sexism. Hernandez's public image has also been shaped by his associations with polarizing political figures. In the 1980s, he maintained a public friendship with former President Richard Nixon, who became a regular presence at Shea Stadium following his resignation. Hernandez reportedly shared several lunches with Nixon, during which the former president initially insisted on discussing baseball, until Hernandez famously asked, "Mr. President, all we do is talk baseball. Could we talk politics?" This led to extensive discussions on international relations, with Nixon reportedly schooling Hernandez on topics involving Russia, China, and Vietnam. It was an unusual friendship, one that raised eyebrows even then. Nixon was a disgraced president, forced to resign because of Watergate, and Hernandez chose to befriend him, to seek his counsel, to engage with him publicly. That choice said something about Hernandez's values, or his curiosity, or his willingness to ignore public opinion. In the more recent political landscape, Hernandez has faced scrutiny for his ties to Donald Trump. In early 2018, social media backlash erupted after Hernandez attended a New Year's Eve party at Mar-a-Lago. The backlash was immediate and harsh. Fans accused him of supporting policies they found abhorrent. Hernandez did not apologize. He did not distance himself. He stood by his decision to attend. Hernandez has been open about his conservative leanings, which occasionally surface in his broadcasts through subtle jabs or praise for specific political figures. While these leanings have alienated some segments of the fan base, particularly in the highly diverse New York market, Hernandez's longevity and cultural status have largely insulated him from permanent damage. But the associations remain, and they contribute to the image of a man who refuses to conform to modern expectations. The political associations are not just about who he has lunch with, they are about what those associations signal to his audience. And for some fans, those signals are disqualifying. The final piece of the Hernandez narrative involves his standing in the history of the game. Despite his 11 Gold Gloves and MVP credentials, Hernandez has consistently fallen short of induction into the National Baseball Hall of Fame through the traditional writer's ballot. His career BWAR of 60.3 and his reputation as the greatest defensive first baseman of all time make him a perennial candidate for the Veterans Committee, yet his path remains blocked by the high offensive thresholds traditionally required for first basemen. In the 2026 Hall of Fame cycle, contemporaries like Carlos Beltran and Andruw Jones were elected by the BBWAA, while Jeff Kent was selected by the Contemporary Baseball Era Committee. Hernandez's absence from the 2026 Contemporary Era ballot was viewed as a disappointment by many Mets fans and analytics proponents, who argue that his defensive contributions have been chronically undervalued by the committee. The numbers tell the story. Beltran finished with a BWAR of 70.1. Jones finished with 62.7. Hernandez sits at 60.3, right in the middle. But Beltran and Jones are in. Hernandez is still waiting. The argument against Hernandez is that first basemen need to hit more. The argument for Hernandez is that defense matters and no one has ever played first base better. But the Hall of Fame voters, whether writers or committee members, have consistently chosen to prioritize offense. And Hernandez, despite his MVP and his championships and his Gold Gloves, has paid the price for that priority. The Hall of Fame debate is not just about statistics, it is about legacy. And Hernandez's legacy is complicated by the cocaine, by the sexist remark, by the political associations. Voters have memories, and those memories are not always kind. So how do you reconcile all of this? How do you reconcile the man who admitted to playing on a cocaine high with the man who redefined defensive standards at first base? How do you reconcile the broadcaster who made sexist remarks with the man man who became the most beloved voice in New York sports media? How do you reconcile the friend to presidents with the star of sitcoms? Keith Hernandez is a walking contradiction, and that contradiction is what makes his story so compelling and so frustrating. The central tension in Hernandez's life is this: he is both a standard setter and a cautionary tale. On the field, he set the standard for what it meant to play first base with intelligence and aggression. Off the field, his cocaine use during the 1980 season set a cautionary tale for what happens when addiction takes hold. In the broadcast booth, he set the standard for unfiltered honesty and deep baseball knowledge. But that same unfiltered nature led to comments about women and associations with political figures that alienated portions of his audience. Hernandez has never been able to separate the good from the bad. They exist together, always. And that is what makes him so polarizing. The courtroom admissions in 1985 were supposed to end his career. They did not. Instead, they became the foundation for a second act that saw him win another World Series, become a cultural icon, and dominate the broadcast booth for 2 decades. But the admissions never went away. Every time someone mentions Keith Hernandez, the biggest addict label is right there, lurking in the background. The sexist remark in 2006 was supposed to damage his broadcasting career permanently. It did not. Instead, it became a footnote in a larger story of a man who refuses to conform to modern sensibilities. But the remark never went away. Every time someone defends Hernandez, someone else brings up the dugout comment. The political associations with Nixon and Trump were supposed to alienate his fan base. They did not. Instead, they solidified his reputation as a man who does not care what people think. But the associations never went away. Every time Hernandez speaks, someone is listening for a hint of his political leanings. This is the climax of Keith Hernandez's story. It is not a moment. It is a state of being. He exists in a permanent state of tension between excellence and fallibility, between respect and condemnation, between love and criticism, and he seems completely unbothered by it. That is either his greatest strength or his greatest flaw, depending on who you ask. The resolution of this story is not clean, and it should not be. Keith Hernandez survived the cocaine scandal, the public testimony, the suspension, the trade, the scrutiny, and the backlash. He survived the sexist remark and the political fallout. He survived the 86-mile commute and the 4-hour surgery in April 2026. He survived because he is stubborn, because he refuses to quit, and because he has built a career on being exactly who he is, unapologetically. That does not excuse the cocaine use. It does not excuse the sexist remark. It does not excuse the political associations that have alienated portions of his fan base. But it does explain why he is still here, still in the booth, still calling games at 72. Hernandez's impact on the game is undeniable. He revolutionized first base defense. He helped the Mets win a World Series in 1986. He became a cultural icon through Seinfeld. He built the best booth in baseball with Cohen and Darling. But his legacy will always be complicated by the choices he made and the words he spoke. The biggest addict label will follow him forever, not because it defines him entirely, but because it is part of the story that cannot be erased. The sexist remark will follow him forever, not because it represents his entire worldview, but because it was said on air and it hurt people. The political associations will follow him forever, not because they define his broadcasting, but because they reveal a side of him that some fans cannot reconcile with the man they want him to be. In the final analysis, Keith Hernandez is human. He is flawed. He made mistakes. He said things he should not have said. He used a drug that nearly destroyed his career, but he also showed up. He testified. He paid the price. He rebuilt. He won. He entertained. He educated. And at 72, after a 4-hour surgery to repair a bulging disc, he came back to the booth on May 4th, 2026, because that is what Keith Hernandez does. He shows up. The rugged commute from Sag Harbor to Citi Field is more than just a drive. It is the final leg of a journey that has seen him survive personal and professional storms, to remain, quite simply, Keith Hernandez. The new 3-year deal through 2028 is not just a contract. It is a confirmation that despite everything, despite the cocaine, despite the remark, despite the politics, despite the age, despite the surgery, Keith Hernandez still has value. And that value is rooted in the same unfiltered honesty that has defined his entire career, for better and for worse. The lessons from Hernandez's life are not simple. They are messy. They are contradictory. They are real. The lesson is that you can fall and still get back up. The lesson is that you can make terrible choices and still rebuild. The lesson is that you can be beloved and criticized at the same time. The lesson is that honesty comes with a cost, and sometimes that cost is alienating people who do not want to hear the truth. The lesson is that survival is not the same as redemption, but it is still worth something. And the lesson is that at 72, after everything, Keith Hernandez is still here, still calling games, still being himself, and that matters. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of baseball's most complicated figures, hit the like button, subscribe to Baseball Icons, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on Keith Hernandez. Is he a Hall of Famer? Is he a cautionary tale? Is he both? Let me know. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one.